The K-1 USA Championships 2000 took place on August 5 of the same year, at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, a recurring locale for the company's American events. It was only the second show that K-1 had ever run in the United States, and was one of 27 they promoted internationally that year, up from just 10 in 1999. It was a tournament event, attended by about 5,400 people, and was aired on television on ESPN2. The winner of the tournament would advance to another qualification event for a chance to compete in that year's World Grand Prix in Tokyo. The broadcast that I readily have access to included only 7 of the 12 fights that occurred that night, possibly due to promotion rights split between K-1 and the co-sanctioning ISKA. Luckily, I've been able to find 3 of the missing matches from other sources, and will include them in this video accordingly. The fights I haven't been able to locate are 2 super fights, namely the 10th and 12th matches on the card, wherein Alfonso Alvarez defeated Ben Garcia, and Tommy Glanville defeated Mark Miller, both by unanimous decision. There is no footage available of the Alvarez-Garcia fight, but highlights from the Glanville-Miller bout were included in the video package for their rematch at the next year's North American Preliminary. The show opens with a super fight in the featherweight division, Angela Rivera versus Linda Loyce. Like all of the super fights tonight, it is sanctioned by the ISKA. The bout is scheduled for 4 rounds of 2 minutes each. Angela Rivera, now Angela Rivera Parr, fights out of Las Vegas, stands 5'6", weighs 124 pounds, and arrives with a 7-2 record. She is the reigning IKF US Amateur Muay Thai champion. Loyce fights out of San Francisco, stands 5'5", weighs 124 pounds, and holds a 3-2 record. She is a trainer at the Fairtex Gym in California, and would eventually represent the US in amateur Muay Thai competition. Contests between female fighters weren't as uncommon in K-1 during this time as they may initially seem, but they were prioritized lower than matches with male boxers, and were typically part of an event's undercard. The company wouldn't have a designated women's division until 2019, much later than many rival kickboxing organizations. Thus, it's fortunate that this match was recorded. Round 1. The fighters start off exchanging kicks, then land dual punches to the head. Rivera scores with a front kick to the face, but Loyce grabs her leg for a slip to cut off her momentum. Loyce largely stays on the defensive, her back frequently against the ropes or in the corner, and within the final 10 seconds of the round, she absorbs several punches to the face after catching Rivera's roundhouse kick. Round 2. Rivera keeps up the pressure with kicks and punches. She's able to block or avoid the strikes Loyce throws back at her, and keeps maneuvering her opponent into a defensive hole. She throws a flying knee, and Loyce is able to land only a few minor jabs in return. Round 3. Rivera scores a questionable knockdown after striking Loyce while holding her leg, thereby increasing what has to be a sizable lead in points. Loyce seems aware that she needs to be more aggressive, but is noticeably apprehensive as she edges forward. It doesn't take much for Rivera to push her back, and Rivera scores with another front kick and straight left to the face. Loyce's counter-fighting attempts don't yield much, and her best strike of the round is a front kick that merely causes a slip. Rivera begins backing up, urging Loyce to follow her and landing yet another face kick before the bell. The 4th and final round commences with Angela Rivera enjoying a considerable advantage in the scorecards. Linda Loyce's only hope for victory is a knockout, but that likelihood has never seemed slimmer, as Rivera keeps pressing. Loyce lands a straight right, but it doesn't faze Rivera, who kicks Loyce several times in the corner. Nevertheless, this is actually the best round for Loyce, whose defensive technique improves while Rivera's accuracy suffers. Still, it's not nearly enough to make up for a large point disparity, and Angela Rivera wins by unanimous decision after very little deliberation by the judges. This was a one-sided but enjoyable match. It wasn't very competitive, but not for a lack of effort, and the number of clean strikes landed to the head makes for exciting viewing. Rivera shone brightly for a young pro, and was far from done fighting. The following year, she became the first American to win a gold medal at the IAMTF World Championships, and in 2010, she finally became a world champion. She retired from fighting in 2012, after which she worked as a combat sport promoter in Australia. There's not much information readily available on Linda Loyce's career, but she competed at least until 2004, becoming the WKA US Amateur Welterweight Champion along the way. She may still be training fighters at the time of this posting. The second match is the first of 4 quarterfinals, Andrei Dudko vs Roman Roytberg. Dudko, originally from Belarus, is fighting out of Chicago and stands 6'3", weighing 231.5 pounds. His record is reported as 25-3, and he is a former Waco World and European Heavyweight Champion. He's also, reportedly, competed in Shidokan Karate. Roman Roytberg fights out of Washington, stands 6 feet tall, and weighs 207 pounds. His record is listed as 21-8. Information on his kickboxing career is scarce, but he'd also competed in mixed martial arts, eventually earning a record of 5 wins, 2 losses and 2 draws. Dudko has a significant size advantage, making this the sort of mismatch that K-1's heavyweight division was famous for. Nevertheless, Roytberg has the advantage of having trained for this tournament under the legendary Maurice Smith, and the benefits of his tutelage will soon become apparent. Round 1 begins. Roytberg demonstrates that he has a solid game plan for fighting someone larger than him. He stays outside of Dudko's range, and promptly begins throwing kicks to Dudko's left thigh. Dudko stalks Roytberg and tries to land some combinations, but he can't connect with much, and repeatedly resorts to the clinch. This doesn't seem to bother Roytberg. At one point, Maurice Smith yells at Roytberg to keep moving, but even when Dudko catches him, the smaller fighter doesn't have much problem dealing with Andrei's strength. Dudko lands a knee after the bell that earns him boos from the crowd, but he's decidedly the worse for wear as he returns to his corner, visibly limping. Only a few months prior to this, Dudko had fought Jean-Claude Leuyer for the ISKA World Super Heavyweight Championship, eventually losing the match after succumbing to Leuyer's constant low kicks. It would seem as though Roytberg and his corner have seen this bout, and are tailoring their strategy around this glaring weakness. Roytberg comes back in round 2 with even greater confidence, going toe-to-toe with Dudko and landing more thigh kicks and an uppercut. Dudko is fighting a little clumsily and with decidedly less vigor, trying to control the distance. Roytberg has the bigger arsenal of moves, at one point trying for a spinning heel kick to Dudko's shin. Dudko's throwing heavy strikes, but he's still not connecting, and he isn't able to do more than land knees in the clinch. Roytberg controls this round from start to finish, but there's one moment of danger for him. Near the end, he drops his gloves and Dudko instinctively goes for the knockout punch. Roytberg's done an excellent job neutralizing his opponent and getting ahead on points, but he may be getting a little too confident for his own good. Round 3. Roytberg is almost certainly leading in the scorecards. He's demonstrated the principle of martial arts in action, as a smaller fighter using skill and technique to overcome a larger opponent. Nevertheless, the tables are about to turn. Dudko gets up from a takedown, lumbers over, and finally scores with a massive right that sends Roytberg to the canvas. Roytberg is clearly stunned as he gets to his feet, and seconds later, he takes a short left that fells him again. Dudko wins by knockout and advances to the semifinals. This is a genuinely entertaining match for its dynamic alone. Andrei Dudko is a big fighter with great strength, but fairly basic combat skills, while Roman Roytberg is the smaller, more technically sound boxer with something to prove. Roytberg's technique and Dudko's sheer ability to take low kicks make for what's arguably the most exciting bout of the night. Again, Dudko's size gave him an advantage, but it's hard to write off his victory as solely the outcome of a mismatch. After failing to land hits early on, Dudko proved himself resilient and patient, taking constant damage but remaining collected while awaiting his opening. Roytberg controlled the match right up until the end, and he deserves credit for this, but Dudko was able to snatch victory back during his last opportunity. He's going to remain a dangerous competitor in this tournament. The second quarterfinal pits Canada's Paul Lalonde against the United States' Jean-Claude Leuyer. Lalonde, 6'5" and 238 pounds, fights out of Surrey, British Columbia, with a record of 17-2, and is introduced as the Canadian and Pacific Northwest heavyweight champion. Leuyer, the decided K-1 veteran, comes in at 6'3" and 223 pounds, fighting out of San Francisco with a 37-7-2 record. He's introduced as the ISKA Freestyle and Oriental Rules World Heavyweight Champion. Leuyer is the clear tournament favorite. In retrospect, most K-1 fans probably only know him as someone who lost against the company's top stars, but at this time, he was a major name in American kickboxing and gets one of the night's strongest ovations when he's announced. He's giving up some height and weight to Lalonde, but as the more experienced and decorated fighter, he's the predicted winner of this match, and it will be up to Lalonde to prove himself. Round 1. The fighters start off exchanging solid shots, with Leuyer showing more aggression than he typically does in opening rounds. It pays off. These early exchanges are a test of power, with both fighters repeatedly coming in to land headshots, and more often than not, Lalonde's the one backing up afterwards. Worse, he's taking a lot of kicks to the left thigh, very reminiscent of the previous match. Leuyer shows some good defensive head movement, and Lalonde continues to take a lot of shots to the face. The round ends decisively in Leuyer's favor. Round 2 begins with Lalonde landing a sloppy punch, but Leuyer otherwise goes back to his effective low kick strategy. Lalonde seems to make Leuyer's nose bleed, but Leuyer responds by landing the decisive thigh kicks that send Lalonde to the canvas. It's really not looking good for the Canadian, but things are about to take another dramatic turn. Lalonde barely manages to get to his feet, he and Leuyer touch gloves, and then, Leuyer walks right into Lalonde's left hook. Lalonde capitalizes, hitting Leuyer repeatedly as he's on the ropes. Referee Cecil Peoples separates them and delivers a standing 8 count, gives Leuyer the sobriety test, and calls the fight when he's too unsteady. Lalonde wins by knockout, in a major upset. This match was very similar to the Dudko-Roytberg bout. The smaller, more technical competitor takes the fight to his larger opponent, only for the bigger boxer to land a major blow and knock the favorite out of the competition. Cecil Peoples deciding to end the match may seem a little controversial, given his reputation for making questionable calls, but in this case, it's probably justified. Leuyer might yet have rallied, but he's still bleary-eyed while being attended by the ringside doctor, so it was probably in his best interest that the contest was ended. Paul Lalonde advances to the semifinals while Jean-Claude Leuyer leaves the tournament. He still had a handful of matches ahead of him, but less than a year later would start talking about retirement. It's a shame that Leuyer didn't have greater success in K-1, but it's impressive that he found a second calling in film. At the time of this recording, he remains active as an actor and stunt professional. The third quarterfinal match pits Milwaukee's Jason Johnson against the Polish-Canadian karate machine Tomasz Kucharzewski. Johnson comes in at 6 feet and 211 pounds with a perfect record of 11 wins. Kucharzewski is also 6 feet tall and weighs 234 pounds, fighting out of Windsor. Kucharzewski was one of the most dominant full-contact karate practitioners of the previous decade, winning multiple international and world titles under various rules. His kickboxing record is listed as 67-5, but this may include his karate record. Round 1 commences. The fighters immediately close in, exchanging punches, and Kucharzewski sinks one of his signature knees for the first major strike. Just seconds into the bout, Johnson gets hit with a big right to the face, a left roundhouse kick to the ribs, and then another right that almost looks like a rabbit punch. He goes down, takes the count, gets back up, and promptly endures another couple of rights that make the referee call the bout. Less than a minute into the match, Tomasz Kucharzewski advances with a blowout victory. This is an impressive showing from Kucharzewski, who really looks like the bulldozer he'd been as a karate competitor. The use of boxing gloves and the resulting inability to grab his opponents contributed to his limited success in K-1, so it's gratifying to see him come to terms with his punching prowess. Jason Johnson no doubt tried his best, but his inexperience is evident by how he reacts to Kucharzewski. He's stunned by the first punch, and raises his hands high instead of covering up properly, leaving himself open for the big hook that puts him down. The blow looks very close to the back of the head, but we don't have a clearer camera angle to make a more decisive call. Whatever the case, Kucharzewski moves on to the semifinals, having taken less damage and expended less energy than any other fighter thus far. The last quarterfinal is Glaube Feitosa versus George Randolph. Feitosa of Sao Paulo is 6'4" and 222 pounds. He's another one of K-1's karate converts, with a stated record that is almost certainly a carryover from his Kyokushin days. He has yet to achieve the success he'd eventually experience with the company, having lost each of his 3 matches thus far. George Randolph of West Virginia is 6'7" and 253 pounds, and comes in as the ISKA North American Super Heavyweight Champion, with a record of 18-2. While Randolph boasts greater professional experience over Feitosa, this might be his first foray into international competition, having previously specialized as a national-level fighter. Round 1 commences. After an exchange of kicks, Randolph comes in with some big punches that make Feitosa clinch defensively. They're separated, and Randolph tries the same thing again, but Feitosa's prepared this time, and catches him with some hard counter punches. Feitosa covers up well against subsequent strikes, then lands a 1-2 combo that sends Randolph crashing to the canvas. Referee Danny Stell immediately calls for the bell, and the match is over. At 1 minute and 7 seconds, it was just 11 seconds longer than the previous bout. Once again, this was a strong performance by a seasoned karate pro. Like Tomasz Kucharzewski, Glaube Feitosa has plenty of tournament experience and knows the importance of conserving energy early on. His performance is a major improvement over his previous outings, giving us a glimpse of the fighter he'd become. Disappointingly, George Randolph was unable to make the most of his size and strength advantage, which would remain a problem in his future K-1 matches. Superfight number 2 is a showdown in the max division for the ISKA World Light Middleweight Muay Thai Championship, between the reigning champion Alex Gong and challenger Melvin Murray. Gong fights out of San Francisco, stands 5'11", weighs 159 pounds and boasts a 21-2 record. An important name in the establishment of American Muay Thai, the late Alex Gong has been champion for almost 2 years, the culmination of a half-decade of professional competition. Melvin Murray fights out of Surrey, British Columbia, stands 5'10", weighs 159 pounds and holds a record of 32-6. He is the reigning WKC World Welterweight Champion, formerly held the IKCC World Welterweight title, and has been competing since about 1985. This is the only match of the night regulated by full Muay Thai rules, allowing for clinching, knees and elbow strikes. There will be 5 rounds of 3 minutes each. It is a showdown of style versus seasoning. Murray enters with a considerably higher level of experience than his opponent, except in Muay Thai competition. With his foundation in traditional kickboxing, taking Gong's championship will not be easy. Round 1. Gong starts off throwing the hard roundhouse kicks that are his trademark, keeping the circling Murray on the defensive. Murray's own kicks come less frequently as he tries to get close enough to box, but to no avail. He manages to absorb Gong's strikes gracefully enough, but quickly develops a sizable bruise on his ribs. Gong targets this area with knees in the clinch, leading to Murray suffering a knockdown seconds before the round ends. Round 2. Murray comes in more aggressively with punches, but can't find purchase. Gong successfully targets the bruised ribs again. Murray visibly flinches with pain, and he becomes very agitated as soon as Alex clinches him. A sidekick from Gong connects, followed by a sweep. Murray catches a low blow moments before the end of the round, but is given time to recover before the bell rings. Twice in a row, Gong comes out decisively better than Murray, who finds himself in the unenviable position of not having a comfortable distance at which to fight, his opponent having the spectrum covered between his kicks and clinches. Round 3. Murray continues to circle, but he's less quick to come forward, and Gong brings the fight to him, landing several hard knees. Murray attempts to come back with an elbow, but Gong isn't fazed. Melvin lands a front kick, his best strike of the match. Gong comes back with knees and another sweep, and moments later scores a knockdown with a low kick. Murray's stamina is now abruptly running low, and he's clearly exhausted as the round enters its second half. A powerful body blow and knee by Gong land, and moments later, Murray goes down from another kick to the thigh. He looks to his corner, and then shakes his head to the referee, forfeiting the match. Alex Gong wins. This match builds on the night's growing trend of one-sided contests. It's a dominant display for Alex Gong, who claimed the early advantage and never relinquished it. While it's disappointing when a match ends with a fighter deciding of their own accord not to continue, Melvin Murray clearly realized that his chances of winning were low while his chances for being injured were high. He fought with a great level of energy for most of the bout, but had no answer to anything Gong threw at him, and by the time he conceded, he'd exhausted both his repertoire and his stamina. Murray fought for K-1 once more, competing in the first U.S. middleweight tournament. Gong was active in Muay Thai up until his death in 2003. He was never defeated for his world title. The third super fight is Giuseppe de Natale vs Dewey Cooper, in a match of 5 rounds, 2 minutes each. De Natale stands 6 feet tall, weighs 196 pounds and fights out of Winnipeg, with a 10-5 record. He is the IKF Amateur Canadian Heavyweight Champion, a young pro making his K-1 debut. Cooper is 6 feet and 197 pounds, fighting out of Las Vegas with a record of 19-3, and is the WKC World Heavyweight Champion. He is an established star of U.S. kickboxing, clearly the match favorite, and looks to make his mark in K-1 after a less than auspicious debut the previous year. Round 1. The very first strike of the match is a low blow, but Cooper recovers. He slips twice during kick attempts, before the fighters mix it up with some furious exchanges. Dewey presses de Natale against the ropes, who counters by pushing his forearm under Cooper's chin and subsequently receives a warning from the referee. Kicks and punches connect before the round ends. Round 2. De Natale begins focusing his efforts on kicking, while Cooper focuses on punches. De Natale connects with a roundhouse kick to Cooper's cheek, but not with enough power to knock the American down. De Natale has now become the aggressor, pushing Cooper back and taking advantage of the fact that his opponent has difficulty closing with his punches. Cooper manages to land several head strikes while Natale holds him in the corner, but none are strong enough to do damage to the Canadian. Round 3. Both fighters manage to block or evade most of each other's strikes during the first half of the round. Natale lands a more solid roundhouse kick to the head as he backs up Cooper, whose strikes largely continue to be blocked. He scores very little of substance while taking a couple more head strikes before the round's end. With the match now decisively in its second half, the scorecards likely reflect an advantage for Giuseppe Natale, who's comfortable in his assertive role, and thus far has had no problem dealing with Dewey Cooper's fists. Though Cooper would go on to a pro boxing career with a good knockout percentage, he's had difficulty during this stage of his kickboxing career in channeling power into his otherwise educated hands. Round 4. Another big head shot from Natale lands on a seemingly winded Cooper. The pace slows down afterwards, but Cooper's attempts to come forward are met with a stiff defense. In the closing second, Cooper takes a hard knee to the torso. As round 5 commences, the advantage soundly belongs to Natale, who keeps Cooper on the defensive with more big roundhouse kicks. Cooper manages to avoid punches as Natale comes forward, but not when Giuseppe is on the inside. As the round nears its end, Cooper puts everything he has left into a left overhand, knocking Natale backwards but failing to properly connect enough to cause real damage. The verdict is in the hands of the judges, who deliver a split decision ruling, in favor of Giuseppe Natale. While the split decision is puzzling, the win by itself comes as no surprise, following the Canadian's consistent performance. He'd go on to win major regional titles and a K-1 preliminary tournament, but stopped competing for the company after 2003. Dewey Cooper fought much of this match uncharacteristically exhausted, though he'd eventually become a reliable part of the K-1 US establishment, winning some significant victories before retiring from competition after 2014. While this match was as one-sided as many others have been, it's the only fight on the card not to end either by knockout or unanimous decision. The semifinals commence with Andrei Dudko and Paul Lalonde fighting their second match of the night. It's a bout between the two giants who managed surprising wins over their very dominant smaller opponents. It's personally disappointing that this tournament didn't deliver the potential Dudko-Leuyer rematch, for reasons that will soon become apparent. The bell rings, they meet. Dudko punches Lalonde into the corner, throws a low kick, and Lalonde goes down. Both the referee and Lalonde's corner immediately see he's injured and simultaneously call the fight. It's over before we know what's happened, just 16 seconds in, making this one of the all-time shortest kickboxing bouts in K-1 history. While several previous fights were very quick as well, this is the only match that's genuinely disappointing, because it ended due to an injury that the other fighters seemingly had nothing to do with. Dudko landed a kick to Lalonde's right leg, but after he goes down, all attention is focused on his left one. The commentators speculate that he injured his knee as he collapsed, and if this is the case, perhaps the loss is better attributed to Jean-Claude Loyer's kicks from the quarterfinals. It harkens back to the very first K-1 US tournament in 1998, when Leuyer was knocked out by Curtis Schuster but had battered his opponent's legs so much that Schuster forfeited his final bout against Rick Rufus. It's easy to feel disappointed on Paul Lalonde's behalf. Regardless of whether he'd have defeated Andrei Dudko, this was probably the last way he wanted to lose. He'd recover and compete for K-1 again, and has since retired to teach Muay Thai in Vancouver. Dudko advances to the finals, having expended very little effort. As we hurtle towards the finals, the pace continues with the second and last semifinal match, Tomasz Kucharzewski vs Glaube Feitosa. Both fighters are still relatively fresh at this point, neither are injured, and both are representing karate. It's something of a minor dream match, with two skilled Kyokushin stylists facing off in gloved competition. As the fight begins, Kucharzewski takes the early initiative to deliver some hard headshots. Feitosa receives a standing 8 count that the audience disagrees with, then promptly takes a right hand that sends him against the ropes. Kucharzewski forces Feitosa into the corner and proceeds to unload. There's frustration on Feitosa's face as he tries to reciprocate, wanting to fight back but taking too many blows to rally effectively. The referee separates the fighters after a clinch, but Kucharzewski promptly recommences the pummeling with Feitosa on the ropes. There's another separation, and more punches from Kucharzewski. Peoples separates them for a third time, and by now Feitosa can barely cover up, much less land a punch of his own. Tomasz gets him into the corner for a second time, and seemingly just counts the seconds before the fight is ended. Kucharzewski wins and is headed to the finals. In a tournament mostly made up of short matches, this fight is more substantial than its predecessor but still isn't very competitive. Again, these are two legitimate karate superstars, but there's no real traditional martial arts technique displayed. Instead, Kucharzewski snatches the advantage using only his fists and refuses to let up, going full steamroller on Feitosa and barely giving him any chance for a comeback. Nevertheless, this match is likely one of the most significant accomplishments of Kucharzewski's kickboxing career. In hindsight, he'd soundly beaten a future World Grand Prix finalist. Despite suffering one of his worst defeats, Glaube Feitosa's eventual legacy makes this match Kucharzewski's greatest victory. Following the missing Alvarez-Garcia match, the finals arrive after only about 15 minutes of combined in-ring tournament action. It's Andrei Dudko against Tomasz Kucharzewski. Dudko enters the fight with an injured leg, but having barely fought at all in his semifinal match, while Kucharzewski had probably the easiest time in the ring of anyone thus far. They're about the same weight, but Dudko is 3 inches taller. This will be another showdown between former karate competitors, but unlike Glaube Feitosa, Dudko has had plenty of kickboxing experience, and has proven that he can stand up to a lot of punishment. Whatever the outcome, this is sure to be a hard-fought bout, and a career highlight for both fighters. Round 1. Kucharzewski immediately tries to land the right hooks that won him his previous matches, to no avail. Dudko knocks him down with a kick to the left leg, but it's ruled as a slip. Dudko follows up with more leg kicks. They joust, coming in fast and landing a kick or a punch at almost the same time. Kucharzewski lands a big spinning back kick to Dudko's midsection, sending him against the ropes. Dudko goes for a spinning back fist, but Kucharzewski just steps behind him before the bell rings. This has easily been the most competitive round of the entire tournament. Dudko, who we haven't really seen fight since the first match, has directed his focus to Kucharzewski's left leg, a hitherto unexploited weak point in the tournament, as Tomasz lost his previous K-1 bouts by leg kick. Kucharzewski, on the other hand, seems to still be trying to figure out what to do, his right hand not having really worked for him. Tomasz did well with his spin kick, but he may be trailing in points. Round 2. Dudko hits Kucharzewski with a left hook that backs him up several paces. Kucharzewski responds with a big right which he seems to think actually lands, but Dudko just lost his footing and promptly pushes back with a clinch. Kucharzewski tries the spinning back kick again, to no avail. Then, things come to a head. Tomasz walks into a stiff left, backs up, and Dudko lands 2 decisive low kicks that make Kucharzewski kneel on the canvas. Referee John Shorley begins the count, but Kucharzewski is already shaking his head in defeat. He's counted out, Shorley calls for the bell, and Andrei Dudko wins the match and the tournament. This fight isn't up there with the all-time great finales of K-1 history, but it's still an exciting match. Dudko, whose performance improved so significantly since his first match, and Kucharzewski, who reached the finals with such momentum, come across as well-matched opponents. For the majority of the fight, it was uncertain who held the advantage. Kucharzewski made a big mistake by not focusing on Dudko's injured leg. He hit him high and hit him low, but failed to zero in on any specific target. Of course, what ultimately ended the match for him was the weakness in his own leg. The knee apparently led to the general decline of his fighting career, and Tomasz only fought for K-1 for a few months longer, retiring from kickboxing altogether after 2003. He died in 2008. Dudko deserves credit for this tournament. He fought mainly national-level competitors, opposed to K-1's very best, but he managed to beat the odds in his first match and overcame a very hard hitter in the final. Disappointingly, the victory ended up meaning as little for Dudko as the loss did for Kucharzewski. As it turned out, Dudko injured his Achilles tendon in training and was unable to take part in the follow-up tournament in Fukuoka. He was replaced by Kucharzewski, who suffered a TKO in the quarterfinal to amateur boxing champ Hiromi Imada. Dudko never competed for K-1 again. The K-1 USA Championships 2000 isn't a must-see event, but at the same time, no one can say it's not exciting. There isn't a single slow match on the card, the tournament is filled with knockouts, and its roster features some future stars in the making. Nevertheless, almost none of the fighters are currently major players in K-1, and the fact that the tournament meant very little in the makeup of the year's World Grand Prix diminishes its importance. It's a fun and breezy watch, ultimately requiring little investment, but it's not worth seeking out in its entirety unless you're already a fan of the competitors or particularly interested in North American kickboxing from this period. For what it's worth, I enjoyed it very much, and consider it a good way for traditional kickboxing fans to make the transition to K-1.